I thought tonight was the peak of our perfect 10-year marriage. But as the police swarmed the ballroom, I realized my husband hadn't just left me. He had calculated exactly how to destroy me. The chandeliers in the ballroom were dim, casting a soft golden glow over the 300 guests who had come to celebrate 10 years of marriage. I looked across the table at Mark. He looked impeccably handsome in his tailored charcoal suit, his glass of vintage scotch swirling rhythmically in his hand. 10 years. We had built a life from a cramped studio apartment to this sprawling estate, a life that felt like a fortress against the world. I felt the weight of my diamond necklace, a gift from him just this morning, and smiled, believing that tonight was the peak of our shared existence. Mark stood up. The room quieted instantly. He smoothed his tie, adjusted the microphone, and caught my eye. There was a strange stillness in his gaze, an icy detachment that I hadn't noticed earlier, despite the wine and the music. "I want to thank everyone for being here," he began, his voice echoing with practiced precision. "They say marriage is about partnership. It's about building something that lasts. But tonight I've realized that some structures are built on foundations that don't belong to the owner." My smile faltered. My friends were chuckling, expecting a joke, some self-deprecating humor about our anniversary, but Mark didn't smile. 10 years ago, I started a journey with Elena. We moved fast. We acquired everything quickly, and for a long time I thought this was the dream. He took a long pause, turning his head to look directly at the heavy wooden doors of the ballroom. But the truth is, the dream was a front, and as of tonight, I'm reclaiming my agency. He pulled a thick manila envelope from beneath the table and laid it on the podium. My stomach dropped. I tried to stand, but my legs felt like lead. "What are you doing?" I whispered, but my voice was lost in the vastness of the room. "I've spent the last 6 months working with the authorities," Mark continued, his voice hardening. "I have provided the Internal Security Service with everything they needed. The bank accounts, the shell companies, the offshore holdings, everything that has funded this lavish lifestyle for the past decade." A collective gasp rippled through the room. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard it was painful. He wasn't talking about divorce. He was talking about dismantling our entire life. He looked back at me, his eyes devoid of any warmth. "Elena, I'm sure you're wondering why I'm doing this now. It's simple. When you get involved in an organized scheme to launder money, eventually the walls close in. I've decided to be the whistleblower before the walls crushed me. The files in this envelope detail your direct involvement in every illegal transaction we made. You see, the authorities aren't just looking for assets, they are looking for a scapegoat." I stood up, my chair screeching against the polished floor. "Mark, stop! You're insane!" I shouted, the panic rising in my throat. But the doors to the ballroom suddenly swung open with a violent thud. 2 men in dark suits stepped inside, their faces grim, badges glinting in the light. Behind them, I saw a team of officers moving with tactical precision. Mark didn't look at me anymore. He was already shaking hands with the lead agent. "Everything is here," Mark said, pointing to the envelope. "She's the one who signed the ledgers. She's the one who held the passwords. I'm just the witness." As the agents began to swarm the room, moving toward our table with cuffs at the ready, Mark turned to me one final time. He leaned in close, whispering into the microphone so the entire room could hear. "I hope you enjoy your anniversary gift, Elena. You're facing a massive term for your crimes, and by the time you're free, there won't be a single penny left of the empire you helped build." I watched in paralyzed horror as the agents reached for my arms, and I realized with terrifying clarity, that the man I had slept next to for 10 years hadn't just left me, he had calculated exactly how to destroy me. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into my wrists, a sharp contrast to the soft velvet of my anniversary gown. The ballroom, once filled with the warmth of music and celebration, had transformed into a sterile, terrifying cage. Guests who had raised their glasses to our longevity just moments ago were now pushing back their chairs, scrambling to distance themselves from the blast radius of Mark's revelation. I saw my sister's face, pale and wide-eyed, before she was blocked from my view by an officer's broad shoulder. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," the lead agent said, his voice as mechanical as a machine. I didn't struggle. My mind was a whirlwind of half-formed thoughts, trying to reconcile the man who had kissed my forehead that morning with the man who was currently watching me be dragged away with an expression of cold, clinical triumph. As I was steered toward the service exit, I caught a glimpse of Mark. He wasn't being treated as a criminal. He was sitting at the bar, casually ordering a drink, while speaking with an officer from the Internal Security Service. He looked relaxed, almost relieved, as if he had just shed a heavy, inconvenient coat. The betrayal didn't just hurt, it felt like an amputation. I realized then that every romantic getaway, every whispered endearment, and every shared investment had been a meticulous performance. He hadn't just been my husband, he had been my architect, and he had spent 10 years building a trap that I was too blind to see. The ride to the holding facility was a blur of flashing blue lights and the sound of my own erratic breathing. Once inside the interrogation room, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and stale coffee. I sat in a hard plastic chair, staring at the gray wall, waiting for the inevitable questions about the organized scheme Mark had described. When the door finally opened, it wasn't the lead agent who walked in. It was a woman with a file folder and eyes that seemed to look right through me. She dropped the folder onto the table. It slid across the surface, hitting my cuffed hands. "Elena," she started, her tone devoid of emotion, "your husband has provided a mountain of evidence, bank transfers, encrypted emails, records of meetings that, according to your digital footprint, you attended. It's a textbook case of financial deception, but there's one thing that doesn't quite add up." I looked up, my voice raspy. "He's lying. He orchestrated all of it. I didn't know the extent of it." She leaned forward, her elbows on the metal table. "That's what everyone says. But here's the problem. Mark wasn't the only one talking to us. We've had eyes on this operation for 18 months. We weren't just watching him. We were watching you. And we found something in your personal safe deposit box that wasn't in the files Mark surrendered." My pulse skipped. I hadn't opened that box in years. "What are you talking about?" "Hidden behind the stacks of cash and the ledger pages, we found a ledger of a different kind," she said, pulling out a photograph of a handwritten notebook. "It details a second organization, a much darker one. And according to these entries, the person running the illegal shipments of prohibited substances wasn't Mark. It was you, and the Internal Security Service has reason to believe that Mark didn't betray you out of a change of heart. He betrayed you because he discovered that you were framing him to take the fall for your own specialized network." My blood ran cold. The photograph in the file showed my own handwriting, detailing dates and locations I had no memory of. I stared at the page, horror dawning on me. Mark hadn't just set a trap. He had woven a narrative so complex that he had successfully mirrored my own alleged crimes back onto me. As the agent began to read me my rights again, listing off charges that carried a massive, multi-decade term, the heavy door groaned behind her. She turned to look, and her face went uncharacteristically pale. "He's here," she whispered, glancing back at me. "The person you were really answering to." As the shadows in the hallway deepened, a man in a plain gray suit walked into the room, holding a device that silenced the security cameras, and he looked at me not like an investigator, but like a predator who had finally cornered his prey. The man in the gray suit didn't say a word. He simply gestured, and the female agent retreated from the room without a backward glance, her movements stiff and mechanical. The silence that followed was suffocating. He pulled out the chair opposite me and sat down, his movements precise, almost predatory. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a single thin document. It wasn't an arrest warrant, it was a dossier on my life that went back further than my marriage, further than the company, back to a past I had buried in a desperate attempt at normalcy. "Mark was a pawn, Elena," the man said, his voice a smooth, dangerous rasp. He thought he was being clever, playing both sides, trying to hand you over to the authorities to save his own skin. He had no idea he was dancing on the strings of a much larger puppeteer. You were never just a wife. You were an asset, and assets don't get to retire just because they get bored of the work. I felt the last vestiges of my previous life crumbling into dust. The accusation of being the mastermind behind the shipments, the ledger in my safe. It was all a fabrication, a surgical strike by this man's organization to ensure I had nowhere left to run. Mark hadn't just been playing a game. He had been a victim of his own greed, and he was being used as the final nail in my coffin. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I want the encryption keys for the digital accounts that Mark doesn't know exist," he replied, leaning into the light. "You have 24 hours to produce them. If you do, we will make sure the Internal Security Service loses interest in you. We will arrange a disappearance. A tragic accident that clears your record and removes you from this jurisdiction forever. If you don't, you will spend the rest of your life in a cell, and Mark will be the one who gets to walk away with the narrative of being a hero." I looked at him, and for the first time, I felt a spark of cold, hard clarity. They thought I was trapped, just like Mark thought he had outsmarted me. But I had spent 10 years watching how these people operated, how they used fear as a currency. During the months leading up to the anniversary, I had known Mark was planning something. He was sloppy, arrogant, and predictable. I had spent that time not laundering money, but building a digital shadow of my own. "You want the keys?" I said, a small, hollow smile touching my lips. "They aren't in the safe. They aren't in the bank. They are synced to a dead man's switch. If I don't check in with the server every 12 hours, the entire history of your organization, every name, every offshore account, every bribe paid to the officials you think protect you, gets leaked to every major news outlet in the country." The man's expression didn't flicker, but his grip on the arm of the chair tightened until his knuckles turned white. "You're bluffing." "Try me," I replied. "You need me alive and you need me cooperating. If you kill me, the system triggers. If you put me away, it triggers. You don't have the leverage you think you have." The standoff lasted for what felt like an eternity. Finally, the man stood up, his face an unreadable mask. "We will be watching you, Elena, every second of every day." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm going to make sure you enjoy the show." He walked out, leaving the door unlocked. I didn't run. I stood up, walked to the mirror, and wiped the smeared mascara from my face. I realized then that I didn't want my old life back. I didn't want the estate or the false prestige. I had been forged in the fire of Mark's betrayal and tempered by the threats of men who thought they owned the world. As I walked out of the holding facility into the cool night air, I pulled my phone from my pocket, the one I had hidden in the lining of my dress, and sent a single message to an anonymous contact. The empire was gone, but the end game had just begun. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was the one holding the match,